Good afternoon. I am a parent, and this is Eric, who's the Executive Director from Hartley Lifecare. So I have 4 sons, but my third son, Jackson, is 32, profoundly intellectually disabled, and he lives in his own home and is the head tenant. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about that for like 6 minutes, and then I'll let Eric talk. Maybe. So this happened pre-NDIS, and it took 11 years to bring to fruition, 11 years of working with Housing ACT and Disability ACT and Hartley Lifecare. So I started when Jackson was 16 and he moved in when he was 27. That was in 2013, so he's been there for 5 years. So there's 25 ACT housing homes in Phillip, in a community. 3 young men with a disability live there, each in their own home, so they don't share a home. That's Jackson, Dan and Ben. They all have different levels of disability and need different levels of support. Each arrangement is completely individual, so they are not an enclave of disability. There are 3 key things about where Jackson lives. 1 is the intentional community. 2 is the co-residency model of support. And 3 is the partnership we have with Hartley Lifecare. So those are the 3 key elements that have made this the success that it is. So of the 25 homes that Housing ACT built, 14 of those are part of what we call an intentional community. I've got one double-sided page that summarises that, and also I've got a book that's got all the information in it, and another book that's got heaps of photos from our 2nd year anniversary, which we can all look at. Oh yeah, and there's 2 more in there. So the other 11 homes are ordinary ACT housing tenants. The intentional community residents, so the key thing was that Jackson, Dan and Ben moved in there first. They got their homes first, and other people were invited to move in there and live in the same community as them, knowing they were there, and they had a commitment to be basically good neighbours, but to be supportive as community members. Not formal support, this is being a good neighbour. And they have a responsibility to do that, and they must become registered volunteers of Hartley Lifecare, so that part of it is quite formal and official. I was very sick of people saying to me they didn't want Jackson to be living where they were, or they didn't want people with a disability in the same community as them. And so this came from a model in Canada where the people with the disability are there first and invite others to join. So that's the intentional community part. It's very social. We just had Halloween, and we had more people at Halloween than we have ever had at anything. People I've never seen before in my life. I spent all night saying, hello, have I met you before? You know, I'm Sally, I'm Jackson's mum, and yes, I'm a friend of a friend, or I know that person, or we belong to this group. And the kids were there, and we did, you know, biting the apple and pinning the spider on the spider web and trick-or-treating. And that is just a typical event that we have. So the intentional community is great for Jackson, Dan and Ben, but actually there's not a single resident who lives there who doesn't benefit. This is not just a community. It is a community built around those 3 young men, but this is a community developed for and by everybody else who lives there. It's just really quite fabulous. The co-residency model of support, Eric might talk about that a bit more. What that does, it's economically advantageous, isn't it? Yep. The consistency of support is something that I have never had in all of Jackson's life before this. He's had the same young man living with him for over 5 years, and he's had the same core group of supporters for that whole time. So you've got consistency of support. There's confidence for me to do, you know, whatever the hell I want, really. I've got a life now. The support model that we have blurs the lines between support workers, family, friends, community. So we don't have lines in the sand that says you can't cross this line and be a friend. You're a support worker, so stay over there and don't blur it. So Jackson lives in his own home with full support. He has everything he needs. He's got the best life he could possibly have. Everybody else who lives there has got a pretty good life too. And people help each other all the time. So it's not about just providing neighbourly support for Jackson, Dan and Ben. Jackson and Adam, his co-resident, will walk somebody's dog if they can't do it, or they'll drive somebody shopping or take them to hospital if they need to go to ED. We have games nights, we have dinners, we have lots of social things. But basically this is a model of support created around and for these men, so that it's a rich environment where I think everybody who lives there benefits, and I certainly think it's probably just about the best thing I ever did in my entire life. No, Eric can talk.
Well done. Yes, it's an incredible model to have the intentional community, and Hartley is incredibly proud to be part of that model. I think Sally approached Hartley probably even before I started, about 13 years ago, with a real vision of doing something different for her son, and two other families that approached us at the same time. I'm not sure that you guys knew exactly what you wanted to do at that time, but that started the relationship with us, which was really good. As a service provider, to be able to get to know what the aspirations of the families are. Hugh talked about, let's talk about every model that you come up with. Let's see how we can help, how we can facilitate. Certainly as a not-for-profit organization whose mission is to support people with disabilities to live their best lives, this is certainly something that we're incredibly interested in doing. And I'm not saying that we would be able to facilitate every idea, every model around, but certainly the intentional community was something that was for us to be able to do. So the issues that the families were coming up to us were things like, what about recruitment? What about insurance, liability insurance? What about the volunteers? How are we going to match this all up? But being an organization that already had some employees, some volunteers and things like that, it was really easy for us to look at the model of support that Sally and the other two families were proposing and say, well, we can fit that in the background, all the red tape, we can take care of that. And I remember having a conversation, as Sally was saying, maybe we should set ourselves up as a business to be able to facilitate and take care of all that. And I said, why would you want to do that? They pay us to deal with that part of the bad part, the red tape, if you want. Let's make this happen for you, and we'll sit in the background and make it happen. So it's really about that relationship with people to be able to create those type of models. So there's never one model that fits for everyone. In this particular situation, the co-resident model was new to us. It's a live-in caregiver model, if you want, but it's a little bit more than that. It's a package that's put together for the employee that lives there. There's a rent component that they don't pay rent. There's an arrangement where they have some time off. We negotiate all that with the employee. Of course, we work incredibly close with the family, and basically the families actually recruit the new co-resident, but with us, and we take care of the employment side. So being the organization that we are, we've got workers' compensation, we've got liability insurance, and we've got all that. So it fits really well in so that we can hire the right person without thinking about all the other things that sometimes are complicated. The other part of the model is, of course, all the other people in the intentional community. So the neighbors that are around Jackson, Dan, and Ben are volunteers of the intentional community. At the beginning, we're going, well, how does this work? If ever they help out with the person, what happens if there's an accident? Of course, that's our thinking. That's what we do as an organization. And say, well, they're not paid, so they're not on workers' compensation. We just register them as through volunteering. So we volunteers. So we called our insurers, and our insurers go, no, absolutely. So we registered a lot of the neighbors, the people that are part of the intentional community, as volunteers. They become insured as if they're employees of the organization, which works beautifully. So there's a lot of things there's a lot of work around these models and everything, but there's a lot of good things that come out of them and things like that. And I'll tell you a little story also about the insurance. Our insurance broker knows very well about the intentional community. I don't know if you know this, but anyways, because they were really interested in what we're doing, and they really go to bat for us when they go look at the insurance and say, you know what, they do wonderful things for people with disabilities. How can we fit this in with the insurance that already have and everything? So it's again, those relationships that you create to be able to get the model together. So that's worked out really nice. It's still very, very successful. There's a lot of work that goes into it. There's a lot of work from the families that go into it. It's not necessarily something that happens overnight. Like Sally said, I think it's taken 11 years or so to get to this point. But certainly, if you find the right organization, if you find the right people to work with, there are some things that can happen. You can make them happen in the end. And I'll just say one last thing also. Often I get asked the question, how does this all fit in with NDIS funding? The quick answer is it doesn't. But, Julie's laughing, but if you have the right relationships, and if you ask the questions, if you work with the NDIA, the people at the local office, the NDIA, have made this work. I think we're on our 4th plan right now, and it's the 4th year of the intentional community support that doesn't necessarily fit in the lines or the square of the NDIS plans. Get your ideas and go talk to the planners. They're there, they want to make it happen, and they have in these situations. And it's just a matter of making sure, because the NDIS is really there to foster innovation, and really this is a perfect example, a model that's really worked well in that regard. So I think that's about it.
Yeah, I would just say, we run out of time. No, I was just going to say that the business of allies and partnerships I can't emphasise enough, so that when we went to Hartley, it didn't matter what we went with. Eric always said, well, we haven't done that before, but let's see what we can do. And I remember once we sat there at a meeting and we had like 7 documents we needed to write, things that had never been written before, like the job description for the co-resident and the roles and responsibilities and the insurance. And I just sat there thinking, oh my God, we're just never going to get it done. There's so much work. And then the next meeting we had a few months later, I thought, oh, wow, we did that. It's like a miracle. So it's a lot of work, and the work goes on, but, you know, you can achieve wonderful things with the right people and the right amount of work and the tenacity. You need your allies, and you need especially organisations to be part of your partnership. That's all.
Any questions for Sally and Eric? Do you want me to apply coffee perhaps to the Alison, excellent.
At the moment in the intentional community, all of the, is it 26 townhouses?
25.
25 townhouses. People that live in all of the townhouses are public housing eligible.
Yes.
My sister lives in supported accommodation, and we're always really interested in her being able to live in a mixed tenancy kind of setting. Have there been has there been any conversation about there being mixed tenancy in that kind of in the complex, where it's not just people who are eligible for public housing, but people who buy into it as well?
No. There hasn't been, but I would just say that I just want to put in a little plug for Housing ACT, because after the initial difficulty of working with a huge bureaucracy, when we finally got Housing ACT and us and, you know, Hartley and everything and the architects on the same page. So now housing, we have a good relationship with a couple of people in housing, and they have been flexible in the way we recruit people into the empty houses, so that we don't have some of the difficulties we had for 5 years with some of the tenants that resulted from, it's a long story, but anyway. Now we have a good process, and so you need the big organisations too, like Housing ACT or whatever, to be on your side and to form a relationship where they can see the value of what you're doing and are willing to be flexible to support the model so it doesn't come crashing down around your ears, which is always possible if they don't come on board with you. So.
Any other questions? I have another question. Oh, yeah, go on.
So we've heard a lot about the, I guess, different numbers of people living together, different numbers of people with disability living together. Did you experience any pressure that there should be more people with disability living in Benambra and perhaps in sharing a house with either Jackson or Ben or Daniel?
Not the latter. We haven't had any pressure for them to share their houses with other people with the disabilities, therefore making it a group house. We have had pressure consistently over the years about having more people with a disability live there. So the argument we have without, I mean, it does always sound a bit elitist, I think, but the thing is, what we wanted was the Benambra community to more realistically mirror the broader community, so that Jackson, Dan and Ben live in a community of all kinds of people, a diverse group of people, not just the people who are grouped together because they have a disability. So we didn't want it to be a disability enclave or a disability specific. But yes, that is a constant thing. People say, I've got someone with a disability, you could have somebody else there with a disability, this person needs housing. But the people who live there who don't have a disability, they have to be able to give. If everybody in there needs support, the whole thing isn't going to work. It's got to be about people who give, people who receive, and people give in different ways. But we have so far resisted that.
I have another question, I'm sorry. I've heard you talk about this before, Sally, and I've known you for a long time. I've heard you talk about how you had an experience where you heard other people talking about this kind of living, and you thought, oh, that's good for you, but that's not going to be suitable for my son. Can you tell us about your change of heart with that?
Yes, that is a true story. Because my son Jackson needs 24-hour support, he's profoundly intellectually disabled, and he also, as part of his condition, he has unpredictable and irregular erratic sleep, so sometimes he doesn't sleep all night. And I went to a conference in Brisbane where people talked about people with disabilities having their own home and having the key to the front door, and I sat there thinking, you people are nuts, actually. Like, that is a ridiculous idea. Jackson could never, ever do that. But the thing is, the seed was sown in my head, and I thought, well, it's kind of an interesting idea, really. And then I couldn't stop thinking about it. And what changed was I kept talking to people, like the people who'd done it before. I kept talking and I kept listening and gathering ideas and sifting out the things that would work and the things that wouldn't, and doing research overseas. And eventually you think, well, why couldn't that work, and why shouldn't Jackson have the same kind of rights and life as my other sons and many other people? And it's just it's a way of shifting your thinking, and instead of thinking it won't work, thinking, well, actually it could work, and I'll make it happen with help. Yeah.
Thank you, Sally and Eric. Thank you very much.